Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
You're very welcome along. So we're chatting through the Sunday Papers. Joe Molloy with you this afternoon. I'll start with the headlines. Front page of the Sunday Times. Like a lot of places leading with the Dubs last night, they were in cruise control really against Cavan. Sixth since defeat of Cavan leaves Dublin one win away from adding to their record. And then over here on the right-hand side, Sexton, talking after Ireland's win yesterday, says Ireland are close to the top table. Same picture on the back page of the Mail on Sunday as the Sunday Times. It's Robbie McDade after his goal last night. Blues cruise, 6 in a row, still on track as Desi's Dubs scorch past Cavan in the final. It was 124 to 12 points, if you happened to switch off before the very end. I suspect plenty of people may have. Star Sport then, it's Bruno Fernandes at Manchester United. He's getting a brand new contract. They're doubling his money, so he's up to 200 grand a week, Bruno. He has scored 22 goals and made 14 assists in just 37 games, so he's done remarkably well. Manchester United winning last night, coming from behind against West Ham last night. 1 in a million, but they can be beaten. That's the verdict of the Cavan manager, Mickey Graham. He has likened them to Pep Guardiola's great Barcelona team. And then beneath that, and this is an interesting development and may well continue as fans come back into the stadium. To what extent, we don't know, but the headline is shame. Rooney plea as Millwall yobs boo their own players taking the knee. So we might come to that in just a moment, but in effect, 2,000 fans in at the Millwall derby game yesterday, and when the players took the knee, proportion of the fans booed. Where am I going next? I have the Observer here. Bursting bubbles. Rashford caps 13-minute turnaround to spoil the supporters' homecoming. This is West Ham 1, Manchester United 3. This is Brian Fenton then taking the lead for Dublin on the back page of the Sunday World. The might of Brian Fenton guns down Breffni Blues as quest for 6 in a row goes on. Brian Fenton is just outrageous, and he was outrageous again last night. Sunday Independent, they also have a picture of Brian Fenton. It's Joe Brolly writing their lead on page 1. Dublin leave no room for failure, which is really the point Brolly is making, that it is a testament to their greatness, every bit as much as they beat the pretenders around them, the way they dispatch the lesser lights, just ruthless efficiency at all turns from Dublin. And then finally, Sunday Mirror, picture of Robbie McDade again. Dubs aren't bothered by snipers. This is Desi Farrell afterwards, as you can imagine, 15-point win in a semi-final. Desi Farrell was asked about Dublin's dominance, and it's not something he's getting too into in any great depth. They have won by an average margin of 17 points to reach the final, Dublin, and cruised all the way through. So they are the back pages. Delighted to say we have Matt Williams joining us for the first time to chat through the papers, former Scotland Leinster coach, part of Virgin Media Television's rugby coverage as well. Matt, great to have you with us.
G'day, Joe. Glad to join you, mate.
Yeah, no, thanks for doing this. And Colm Keys of the Irish Independent. Colm, how you doing?
Hi, Joe. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hey, Colm. Good, mate.
I might, before I get into the Dubs, just touch on that interesting story, back page of the Sun. It's in the Sunday Times as well. Millwall fans boo own players for taking the knee. Peter Wilson, for instance, here in the Sunday Times, and Tony Little in the Sun. So Peter Wilson writes that Millwall supporters condemned by players, managers after the game's ruling bodies last night after returning fans booed players taking a knee in the continuing campaign against racism and discrimination before the championship match against Derby County. 2,000 supporters back in the Den after a 9-month absence. And it took Millwall supporters little time to disgrace their club, says this piece. Gary Rowett, the Millwall manager, was disappointed. He said the club do an enormous amount of work on anti-racism, and the club do a lot of work in the community, and there's some really positive stuff. Wayne Rooney, the Derby interim manager, everything that's been going on, it's very surprising that this happened. It's a shame because there has been great progress in the campaign, and hearing what's happened is very disappointing and upsetting for a lot of people. Colm Keys Richards, the Derby County forward, he stood with his arm up during the taking of the knee, and he called the booing an absolute disgrace. And then Matlon Romeo, Millwall's 25-year-old black defender, he was talking to the South London press, and he said, "Today's game to me now has become irrelevant. the fans have been let back in, which the whole team was looking forward to. But in society, there is a problem, and that problem is racism. The fans who've been let in today have personally disrespected not just me, but the football club. What they have done is booed and condemned a peaceful gesture which was put in place to highlight, combat and stop discriminatory racism and behaviour. Millwall, concerned in advance that something like this would happen, released a statement on behalf of the players and manager in advance of the game, saying it was the squad's duty to reinforce the positive messaging. Taking the knee for us is in no way representative of any agreement with any political messaging or ideology. So they tried, the club, to get in front of it, but to no avail, Matt. And this is the first time fans have been back in the stadium. I was wondering if there'd be any reaction to the taking of the knee. In the main, there wasn't, but as the Millwall player Melon Romeo says there, this is an issue in society, so it's going to manifest itself at football games.
It is, Joe. It's an interesting one in that some people are saying that it's virtue signalling, as the term goes. But Millwall got a long history of having pretty rough supporters. You know, they were, during my time when I used to live in the UK in the 80s, they were very violent. I remember once they came down to Swansea where I was playing, and they absolutely destroyed every building on the way from the station to the ground there, the old vetch ground of Swansea. So you're always going to have Luddites and the rusted-on bigots, but I think the good's got to stand up against the evil, you know. And if sport is saying we're going to take this, going to do these gestures, and the players of the generation are very much believe it, the players across all sports very much supportive of it, from cricket right through to every sport you could imagine, because they're trying to send a message to people like that. And it is a disgrace. And they obviously were informed that some of these very ignorant people were going to try and disrupt a very worthwhile cause.
Colm, it doesn't take many to disrupt it, is the point.
No, Joe. If you had posed this question, and if this question was posed as to where this might happen, you know, you'd think of obviously Premier League clubs, but you would have Millwall as Matt pointed out, their reputation is not good. You would have Millwall on any shortlist if this was going to happen. I actually didn't think it would happen. Naively, did not think it would happen, but I would imagine this will spread a little bit, and the flames of this will be hard to dampen down in some places. And obviously it went well in other venues, but I think the further down the leagues you go, if this happens and if this continues, I think you might see some reactionary from those leagues in terms of fans. I think there will be a reaction, and this will be dealt with. And unless clubs can get their fans under control, because obviously taking the knee is going to stay with pre-game, that's going to be built in and part of it for the foreseeable future. So I do think clubs will be forced to take action against supporters, because, you know, by booing it is a racist gesture. There is no doubt.
It's very difficult, Matt, if the gesture becomes a point of acrimony and a flashpoint, which goes against everything it's trying to do. Your first instinct might be to say, well, if this is becoming a massive flashpoint, well, then maybe we just leave it and don't give the idiots an opportunity to boo. But then that is bowing down to them. It
is. I mean, I'm a San Francisco 49ers supporter. I remember when Colin Kaepernick first made the gesture, and, you know, it's sort of moved on from there. But you also saw that there was a reaction, a massive reaction against Kaepernick. It cost him his career. So we do have to just acknowledge exactly what Colm said. There's a part of society that's going to stand up for this. Some of them will say, look, you know, I'm not racist, but I don't like the gesture. But I don't think those people will boo. I think the people that are booing, you know, it's education, mate. Like, there's just a lot of ignorant people in the world. And unfortunately, they can pay their money and come into sporting venues. I really don't. You can't give into it. I certainly wouldn't give into it. But I don't know how you're going to stop the ignorant from venting their voice in that scenario. I think it'd be a very, very ugly scene if it does continue to grow.
Yeah, it's very tricky. Thankfully, so far it's isolated, but there is the distinct possibility it does spread and there are copycat gestures. I mean, how difficult for that player I quoted, Melon Romeo, who is a Millwall player, to hear his own fans, behave like this, and then the next minute purporting to cheer him on with no sense of hypocrisy or shame. It's just dreadful for somebody like that Colm to be looking out at the stands and seeing these idiots and then having to play for them in effect.
Obviously very difficult, and no more than Danny Rose and what all those players have had to listen to Raheem Sterling too. But I don't know about you, but I didn't get the sense that Gary Rowett, the manager, was he was all that strong in his condemnation. And obviously we would have to listen to his interview to appreciate, well, how did he really feel about it. But he said he was disappointed, obviously disappointed. But the condemnation doesn't come across, certainly in the Sunday Times piece that I'm looking at here that references it, it doesn't come across strongly. Obviously there's some level of balance there, but I thought maybe from the manager the level of condemnation would have been stronger for something like this.
That jumped out at me as well. Again, I'd like to see his press conference. I'd like to see his tone of voice. But that jumped out at me.
And it's obviously only a quote, and maybe he did, and you'd have to respect it. Maybe he did say something else in relation to it that hasn't been put out there. But it just doesn't jump off the page here that this is a strong condemnation of it from a manager.
No, and I think we're assuming that his strongest words would be printed. That's the nature of journalism. That's what a reporter would do. They would take his strongest line. So again, he said he was disappointed. He said, I'm disappointed we're talking about that when we should be talking about the fact we're all back and we want to enjoy football again. Yeah,
just doesn't jump out at me when you read the players' quotes, when you read the Romeo's quotes. I mean, the game is irrelevant to him now. He says the fans have been let back in, and he directly relates it to racism here. So the difference between the manager's reaction to it and the players' reaction to it is quite stark.
It is. I think that's a very fair point. We'll park that there and give him the chance to say a bit more in consideration, but that's a well-observed point, and it jumped out to me as well. It's disappointing we're talking about this is as strong as he's gone in the Sunday Times comments as well, or the Sun on Sunday comments as well. I flicked through that. I didn't see anything stronger from him,
Yeah, so you would expect the manager of the club to be as outspoken about it as any of the players, as the leader in the club. Really, you would just expect that they would take their lead from him.
So the rugby then. Johnny Sexton here on the front page of the Sunday Times. Ireland are close to the top table. Peter O'Reilly. Andy Farrell ended his first year as Ireland coach by watching one of the team's best performances of 2020. It prompted his captain Johnny Sexton to point out that the squad were in a better place than they had been given credit for. Sexton said post-match, we feel we aren't at the top table yet. We haven't been able to win away from home against the big teams like France and England, but we have won every other game. Obviously, the performances haven't been amazing for 80 minutes. Last week was a prime example. Good 40 minutes. Took the foot off the gas in the second half. Wasn't good enough, we were told that, but we back our coaches. We think they're doing an outstanding job, and they are very different from the previous regime, and that takes a little bit of getting used to. We've another step to go, but we're happy with our progress, and today I think it showed. Matt, I'll get your opinion in a moment, but you might give us a sense of the pieces which you agreed with, didn't agree with, liked, thought were good, thought were on the money.
Yeah, there's a few there. I think Neil Francis, first in the Indo, was the one I'd be most au fait with, where he was saying, like, Scotland were pretty poor. And basically going back saying the Celts, we're the best of the Celts, but that's not a very high standard. He also, Frano did say that they were talking about the number of South Africans that were playing for both sides. Said there were more vans on the field than a VW used sale yard, because there was, I think there were 12 players on the field that were playing for both Scotland and Ireland that had been born and done all their junior rugby in other countries, which was making a farce out of this 36-year residency rule. A few others a little bit more sympathetic, saying that they get a pass for coming third in the Champions Cup, but also pretty much everyone saying that the Champions Cup has been a pretty poor fare right across the board. No much more the example, again, that Frano points out, in the final today, some of the best French players, Dupont and Entermac, won't be there. They played for their club Toulouse last night because there was an agreement between the French Federation and the clubs that the players can only play 3 international games. So the week of the final, the best 9 in the world and one of the best young 10s in the world is not available to play in the final. They've got to go back and play for Toulouse last night against Bayonne in the rain on the Atlantic coast of France. Sort of sums up the year and the tournament. You know, it's been we've tried to get excited, but nothing much has come up. And I think pretty much everyone's trying to say the same thing along those lines regarding the Irish. You know, Johnny's got to defend himself, but it's been very poor. It's very, very.
Yeah, Brendan Fanning calls it a decent win. He says when Andy Farrell thinks of this game, he'll be delighted with 2 of the new men, Caelan Doris and Hugo Keenan. He'll be enthused about the form of Porter. He'll be concerned about the form of Healy. And then there's the durability of his captain, Johnny Sexton, and the gap between his standard and the rest. Elsewhere, Peter O'Reilly, Ireland on right track is the headline. He calls the win more convincing than the one in February. A victory will be a source of relief, most of all. Ireland were on the defensive all week, determined to prove the doubters wrong. There was a sense of us against the world from the team. This is not a well that can be tapped every game, but it served its purpose yesterday. And says 6 wins out of 9, 3 defeats coming in London and Paris, destinations where Ireland traditionally struggle, and makes the point that Cardiff is now just 9 weeks away. Hugh Farrelly in the Mail on Sunday, for instance, he says, while Ireland's victory looks convincing on paper, the truth is this was a fitful performance, splashes of fluidity mixed with the middling mediocrity, offering no surety of cohesion, capable of challenging the world's elite sides. He says the national team needed a radical revamp after the crushing disappointment of the World Cup, and yet 12 months on they find themselves marooned in a drafty halfway house somewhere between Joe Schmidt's largely glorious past and a tentative future. It says at one point, if Andy Farrell had followed the French regeneration route by installing James Ryan as captain, surrounding him with the talent good enough and young enough to be peaking for France 2023, he would have bought himself some time. Instead, he clung to the core that delivered for his predecessor. And goes on like that, and he makes the point, overall, Farrell got a soft introduction to the Ireland job, his appointment being broadly accepted as a natural succession, the way it was for the 2 previous coaches. However, both Schmidt and his predecessor, Declan Kidney, were obvious appointments on the back of their provincial achievements in a way Farrell was not. And it's only recently that he and his management team were coming under proper scrutiny. The win over Scotland will lessen the glare, but 2020 feels like a lost year when Ireland should be far further towards the France 2023 road. So what were your thoughts on the game, Matt?
I think that's a very good summation, by the way.
Hugh Farrelly, yeah.
I would concur with 90% of those. Look, you can only play who your opposition. We have to say this is the 3rd time in a row the Scots have come to the Aviva and have dominated for long periods of the game, but have failed to score tries in that period of dominance. Even though Scotland were leading, I think it was 9-6 at the 38th minute, they had made a number of very, very incisive attacks and looked a better team for the majority of that first half, but couldn't get the tries on the board. And then, Joe, I know you hate this term, but in the minutes just before half-time and just after,
I've heard of them.
Championship minutes, I know you hate it. But again, Ireland score in the 38th minute and the 42nd minute.
Yeah.
Game over. And from there, they pretty much dominated. And I agree, you've got to say Doris was sensational. He's a natural number 8. But there are a lot of problems between taking that team from where they are to the next level. And as I've said, the top 4 teams in the world, England, France, South Africa, and New Zealand, are significantly above the Pumas, the Wallabies and Ireland. And then the next year down where Wales have got to with the Welsh and the Scots and possibly the Fijians. So how you bridge that gap is about talent. And while we're producing quality players, there's not a lot of top-line world-class players in that Irish side at the moment. And that's a problem for any coach. They're good players, but you haven't got a Intermac, you haven't got a Dupont, you haven't got a Farrell, you haven't got a Bowden Barrett, you haven't got a Factor Clerk. You know, they just don't happen, and that's more than coaching. That's raw talent and brilliance that coaches can't put into their players. But the structures still remain scratchy. So Ireland are where they are. They're in the clump of the second tier.
So at best, over the next year to 18 months, we could aspire to the structures improving, but there's only so much anyone can do about the talent.
I look, that's something I believe. Other people don't agree with me, but I certainly can't see the world class talent in that side. Now, Sexton and Conor Murray were absolute top of the range world class talent in the past, but they've got on. Now, there's James Ryan's okay. James Ryan's not a bad player. Doris is coming through. You know, we haven't got centres and wingers and fullbacks that are setting the world on fire. We just don't have it. And they can't even decide who's their fullback. And we're in that patch. I'm not happy with the way the team's coached. I always had questions on Andy Farrell. It's a terrible thing to say because he's never been a head coach. And I just can't believe how you could possibly put someone in to be national coach that's never, ever done the job before at any level. Now, if you follow the French route, they've got a great coach in Fabien Galtier. But Fabien Galtier has been head coach of 4 clubs or 3 clubs. So, he's got a lot of runs on the board. So even though he's assistant coach for France at the last World Cup, he'd been the head coach. And Andy hasn't done that. It's going to take him time to come to grips with what that role is because it's so different to being a defensive coach. So 2020 is a lost year, but I have great concerns 2021 is going to go the same way.
Mm. You know, in relatively recent history, there was a golden generation in the early 2000s which came through, and we know all the names. And there was world-class talent there. And then we had another generation which came through on the back of that, and they equally, you follow up a Ronan O'Gara with Johnny Sexton, you follow up whoever, Peter Stringer with a Conor Murray. There was the next generation through, the Jamie Heaslips, the Luke Fitzgeralds, the Rob Kearney, that generation, really were good as well. And so maybe, Matt, we were kidded into thinking, well, we now just have a conveyor belt and the Leinster school system is great and, we'll just keep producing talent which is quote-unquote world-class. Maybe we just had 2 golden generations back-to-back. That's a possibility for a country this size.
Oh, it certainly is. And I think Leinster's dominance and the Irish dominance of the domestic competition puts us in a bit of a false sense of security. And then our obsession with the European Cup also puts us in adds to that false sense of security. And, like we really, who's the replacements for Sexton? Who's the replacements for Murray? The guys that we've given the opportunity to are well below top line international standard. And that's why we find ourselves with, a relatively high number of foreign-born players wearing the green jersey. And that's I don't think that's good for the country. It's something I don't agree with. And it's not the players' fault. The players are innocent in this. It's the system's fault. But you've got to say, we've got such a great production line. Why are we having to select players that are being qualified under the 36-month rule? So I think there is cause to be concerned there.
Mm. And a last one, all things being equal, everybody being fit, which Irish players make Warren Gatland's starting 15 for the Lions if it was to happen tomorrow?
It's a tough question, isn't it? Does Furlong make it? Does Ryan? Possibly not. It's going to be hard to push out both those English second rows. Back row, maybe Doris. None of the halves. Possibly Ringrose when he returns. None of the back 3.
Yeah.
So not many.
Yeah.
And even then, they could miss out.
Yeah, sure. Colin, what did you make of the coverage generally and what Matt's saying?
I suppose it was like leaving cert, Joe. If you're reading the reviews, they mostly come in at the same point for me. Brendan Fanning's piece in the Sunday Independent equals Peter O'Reilly's piece in the Sunday Times in terms of their reflection. If you were giving a grade, leaving cert predictive grade, you'd say H4, C+, something around that, 60 to 70% for the season. It's attached to Brendan's piece in the Sunday Indo as a breakdown of the Andy Farrell's results so far. And there's a common theme there. They're a good bit better than Scotland and Wales. They're a good bit behind England and France. From what I've seen, I just feel power is a big deficit in the Irish team by comparison to certainly to England, and even to a degree France. I just think there's a power issue there. And in the Mail on Sunday, interesting. I always like to see someone projecting far forward, and Hugh Farley has done it with his team for France in 2023. You know, it often gives you an idea of, you know, where. Obviously, it's designed to give you an idea of where things will be. And Hugh has picked his team for France in 2023. And obviously, Sexton and Conor Murray are not there. It's John Cooney and Ross Byrne. One of the interesting things, and you've mentioned Doris, and Matt mentioned how good Doris was, and that's reflected to some degree in the other pieces. But Hugh mentions in his breakdown of the team that Doris is turning into the finest number 8 the country has seen. That's a big statement, and it's a big projection for where he's going. I'd just be curious, especially with your view, Matt. I mean, is he that good that he's going to be the greatest number 8 Ireland has ever had? Because that's certainly, and you've mentioned him already into as a potential Lions number 8. That's a very, very quick progression for him. And also just to see that, you know, Ryan Baird, James Ryan, and Hugh has Rhys Ruddock back into the mix in the back row, and he does bring a bit of power and that size factor that I just feel Ireland are a little bit deficient in at the moment.
It's an interesting one. I certainly wouldn't be going out saying Doris going to be the best number 8 Ireland's ever seen, because we've had some great number 8s. He's a good kid, and he's coming forward. He's a potential line, but he's got to get in front of Vinopola. Now, is he better than him right now? Now, sometimes in those line sides, they do pick 1 or 2 guys from other countries because they got it politically. They can't just put out the whole English side, even though Warren Gatland wanted to put out the whole Welsh side at times. But it's, you know, I wouldn't go that far with him. But he's a good runner, dynamic ball carrier. He's the best dynamic ball carrier since Victor Costello and Jamie Housley did the first half of his career, where Jamie was sensational ball carrier. He diminished a bit after those injuries. But he is one of the only guys constantly breaking the game on. Probably our only player. You know, and if we go in to that World Cup with John Cooney and Ross Byrne at 9 and 10, you know, wow, we're going to say goodbye at the quarterfinals again. Because right now those guys are well below the quality requirement.
If Joey Carberry sorted his ankle out, we'd feel better.
It would be nice to have Joey around. Again, mate, what do we say? It's been so long since he played. I'm going back to remember him coming off over a year ago, like having a year out of the game. It's a long, long time. So I don't know how he's going to come back, and how has this injury affected his speed, affected his agility. Like, these are all just unknowns.
They sure are. Just to finish up on the rugby coverage, so it's mainly, as you can imagine, Ireland-Scotland, but Stephen Jones is a bit shaken, I would say, because everybody's agreed with something he wrote, and I think it's freaked him out, frankly. He's not sure what to do. So he says, fans are united in boredom. For once, our readers agree, and they have some innovative ideas to improve the sport. So Stephen Jones was writing recently about where the game of rugby union is at, and it's not in a good place, he feels. He talks about, these are the strangest of times. Our readers reacted in their hundreds to our feature last week on rugby's headlong fall into a pit of endless high kicking and the galaxy of petty aggravations, the way the game is refereed, the pouting refusal of packs to form a scrum, that so many defenders stand so far offside they may as well be wearing the jersey of the opposition, and the new idea that you don't want the damn ball. So he's detailed what various readers of the Sunday Times have suggested, you know. For instance, somebody said, very strange, I found myself agreeing with Stephen Jones. Basically, all the letters started with that. But very, very strange, found myself agreeing with Stephen Jones. The game has become a boring kick fest. Somebody called DJL said, totally agree, I've stopped wasting my time watching international rugby. Derek Bateman, another reader, agreed. Agree about kicking the ball away, especially the tedious box kick and the laughable ritual leading up to it. And then the ultimate put down, says Jones, Mr. Norfolk revealed, I agree, rugby has been devalued as a spectacle. Normally I walk the dogs before or after a game. Yesterday I ended up walking them during it. And then there's all sorts of suggestions coming in. Extra points for a try, or somebody even says that two people suggested a player can call for a mark from a kick at any point in the field and they can kick to touch when their own team, and then their own team will then get the throw-in. That will stop aimless kick tennis. Jones says, my first thought was, this is ridiculous, but wait, suddenly you'd be making it risky and counterproductive to hoof the ball into the air. No more boring box kicks. Radical, but perhaps not nearly as preposterous as some of the laws currently in the book. And on he goes, various bits and bobs. He does finish off by saying, the quote of the week, or maybe the decade, summing up rugby's ghastly state, came from George Ford. Possession of the ball, he says, is like handling a ticking time bomb. There you go. So, fans united in boredom. Colm, have you, as a kind of, general casual sports fan, by casual I mean, you probably watch every match going of everything, but are you less enamoured with the game of rugby? Have you noticed this over the last couple of years?
Yeah, and I have been for some time. I think rugby has become very, very predictable. I think there's too many players on the field basically in a rugby match. They're bigger in size. They cover the ground quicker. They cover it for longer, and yet 15-a-side has prevailed over all these years. I would reduce it by at least one, possibly two. I think far too many collisions. You can see what's happening a mile off, and that ingenuity seems to be missing. That spark of creativity has gone. It is a lot of crash, bang, wallop, and obviously putting the ball up into the air. One of the readers who responded to Stephen Jones here suggested doubling, or was it 9 points for a try that originates in the team's own half. And while 9 points might be a bit of a stretch, there is certainly some merit in rewarding more a try that is sourced and originates in the other half of the field, because that would obviously incentivize teams not to kick the ball away and to have more of a go from a deeper position. And that would be a more attractive product, possibly. But I do think defence is key. And, teams work so much on defence that it is a strategy not to have the ball, put pressure on. And it seems to me, and again, this is only just from watching it, that there was far more emphasis being put on defence and squeezing opponents than there is in actually trying to create something off your own bat, because rugby is becoming a bit of a switch-off game in its predictability, and it needs something. I just feel less players on the field, create more space, and because, as I said at the outset, they are bigger, faster, cover the ground more, stronger, and they're not just getting the gaps. Basically, defence is too good, and it needs a bit of liberation somewhere.
It's funny, I read a comment from Ben Youngs as well, to go with the George Ford one. England are very much on the same page here, all the English players. He said, previously, Ben Youngs said, if you made a line break, all the odds were on you as a team to go and finish it. Now he says the breakdown's so fiercely contested that after any line break, I almost feel we as a team are more vulnerable than in any other part of the game, which is a damning state of affairs. So, Matt, are all these ailments, are they a rugby problem or are they a Northern Hemisphere problem?
Rugby problem.
Okay.
Rugby problem for sure. Colm's on it. It's about time and space. It's the defence, the negative is always easier than the positive. Creating space is harder than denying space, and the defences are denying space. And the problem, in my opinion, rests with the lawmakers. They have to step in, because in the old days we had rucks. So 6 or 7 forwards, again, what Colm's saying is right, 5 or 6 forwards would be in every ruck from both sides. So you have 10 players in a ruck. Now, no defenders join that ruck. If they don't win the ball at the first go, they come out. So you have 3 attackers in, and you only have 12 or 13 attackers against 15 defenders. So you're always outnumbered. So they've got to provide laws that give the attack more time and space. That, to me, that's moving the defensive line back. And again, along Colm's lines, I agree. Our system of rewards, in other words, the points system, is totally skewed to penalties. So teams are playing for penalties. We're scrummaging for penalties. And scrummaging is so boring at the moment. It's taken 3 or 4 minutes. One game was 20 minutes of scrums. 20 minutes. Like against the All Blacks versus Argentina, there was a scrum awarded for 75 minutes. So it's 5 minutes to go. As the clock was about to turn red in that game, they were still on that same set of scrums. It's just outrageous. So the game is in a dire place. I've never seen it as that. And it's because our legislators are being blocked by politics. See, a lot of the teams that are winning, they don't want to change the laws, so they won't vote for any changes. People aren't putting the game first. They're putting themselves first. But it's boring. It's predictable. Everyone's the same. Again, I would come back to the Irish thing. Who's playing different? France, New Zealand, South Africa, and England are all playing different. Everyone else is playing like New Zealand. It's the same game plan. We've seen it at schools and at club. We've got to find some creativity, but we need some coaches to outthink it. But, having Ben Young's saying that when you make a break, you're most vulnerable is true. We saw it yesterday. The Scots made a break straight away on top of a penalty against Australia. Argentina, same thing, make a break, right, penalty against you, losing possession. It's ridiculous.
Okay. Let's move on to the GAA then. I mean, we spent a lot of time in the rugby there. I should say there's not a huge amount in the papers. Like it's mainly rugby, GAA, a few previews of the hurling and camogie next week, because obviously the Sunday papers won't get the chance, particularly with the camogie, to do that. And not, there's no great kind of massive feature interviews or whatever. So that's kind of the flow of the papers today in general terms. On the GAA front, Colm, there's just a continuation, I suppose, of the slight wariness of Dublin's domination. I mean, I know myself watching at home, kind of once we got 10, 12 minutes into the second half, I drifted a bit and I was flicking around. I was in and out of the room. It wasn't a semi-final I needed to stick with necessarily. So that would have been the experience right across the country. And then actually I came back at full time to see what the talking point on the panel would be. And the talking point was Dublin dominance. Colm O'Rourke saying 2, 3, 4 teams is what we need in Dublin to stabilise things again and make things very competitive again. So, look, everything points to Dublin closing in on their 8th in 10 years.
Oh, there's no doubt, Joe, that this... I mentioned about rugby being predictable, but Dublin's march and it's almost like a scorched earth policy through Leinster and now into the All-Ireland series. They're leaving nothing behind. They're flattening teams. I mean, Cavan probably won't feel it as much as Meath would have felt it 2 weeks ago, the psychological hit that they took, because, they can go back up and they won Ulster, and Ulster is a big deal. But you get beyond that and you lose an All-Ireland semi-final by 15 points and you're left thinking, this is a gap we just probably, deep down, I'm sure they think, this is a gap we're not equipped, either as a county or as a group of players, to bridge here. And Dublin they're just too good. It's incredible to watch. We mentioned Brian Fenton at the outset there. I remember having a discussion with you, Joe, in Croke Park a few years back. You might have been in the studio before one of the games, and I mentioned, it happened to me, I thought Brian Fenton was the next best midfielder to Jack O'Shea that I'd seen. I'd say his career was about 3 or 4 years on the run at that stage. I'd put him up there with Jack O'Shea now. What he's done since, it's just remarkable. He seems to be playing a different game to the majority of those he's on the field beside. Dublin will win the All-Ireland. They'll win it by an average of double scores. They're already at an average of 17. They treat opponents with the utmost respect in a way, in that they just don't give them an inch. They don't show any complacency. Joe Brawley mentions that on the front page. And while there is appreciation for what Dublin are doing, there is that other question of where is this all going, and how far are they going to stretch this, and is this just a once in a generation team? Well, it's not, because the once in a generation team that were doing much the same, maybe not to the same degree at the beginning of the decade. Now, obviously, with some interruptions, Mayo took them out and Donegal took them out in All-Ireland semi-finals. But since Fenton and Kilkenny have really taken hold of this team, and people will say, well, when Stephen Cluxton goes, maybe that will make a difference. Stephen Cluxton has hardly had anything to do in this championship. He obviously hasn't conceded a goal. I can't remember a standout save now. I didn't see all of the Laois game in its entirety, but I just, at this moment, I can't recall him having to make a save of real significance. But Kilkenny and Fenton, I don't know, is there a more influential access there has been in the game between those two guys? They're always on the field. They're always ever present. And now Con O'Callaghan has really started to develop. You see him coming out. So beyond them, well, Dublin have a team in an All-Ireland under-20 final, and between All-Ireland under-20 and under-21, they're going for a fifth title in 11 years. So the backup to all of this is incredible too. And you think about the strength of the clubs and the size of the clubs, and GAA has become a really, really popular sport. And we can go back to the strategic report and all of that, and we've done that many times, obviously. But this is all leading to, and like, cut the funding, that's an argument, but that's not going to stop. Clubs are going to find a way to finance coaches and all of that. They're going to continue to do it. Players are going to continue to dominate. Dublin are going to continue to dominate. They may not always win games by as much as they're winning, but they will win, and they will always be there. And it does lead to a fundamental question as to a capital city, 1.4 million represented by one team. Of course, it's a question. And while it would be unpalatable and it's the most unpalatable option in the long run, I think ultimately it's a decision the GAA will have to make down the line. There is no question.
Yeah,
you really do have
to. It's a horrible thought, because you're throwing out over 100 years of tradition if you split Dublin, and it's so sad if that has to happen. But the only people I can see arguing that this is not set to continue for decades to come are ex-Dublin players, and clearly they're just biased. They're emotionally invested. They say, well, we always had population, and nobody thought Stephen Cluxton, he emerged before the dominance. But it just fails to recognise what's happening here. The population has, for the first time, with sports science and with proper organisation, it has been harnessed properly for the very first time.
And engagement. You look at the South City, you look at the big clubs in the south side of the city, and you see the teams and the numbers that they are producing, and this is really only going one way. Now, you'd expect that Meath and Kildare would get spent. Like the county, inter-county, the system of inter-county is designed for, an era of many, many years ago, when there was, more of a rural link, when, there was far greater agriculture, and that counties were able to, it was designed for a different era. But society has obviously changed. Demographics have changed. There's been a huge shift to the east, and country people are coming into Dublin clubs now, and really it's taking off as much on the back of that. Now, there was a huge tradition in Dublin. You see that with the Brogan sons of Jack McCaffrey, son of Noel McCaffrey, Barney and Dean Rock, James and John McCarthy, even back to Kevin McMenamin's father played as well. So there's a huge link within Dublin. But now that's been inflated by so many country people investing in the clubs there, and they're taking off, and obviously great strength in numbers, and of course from that point of view, huge success story. And obviously the funding way back in the early 2000s is linked to all that. And when you put the two together, it's just been an explosion. The original plan, of course, to give the funding was to split Dublin and to divide the teams over a 3-year period with that strategic report, to split them at minor level first, then have 2 league teams, and eventually 2 championship teams. I do think the first steps are to split them at underage level and see where that takes it. Obviously, again, I'd stress unpalatable, and notwithstanding the fact that to me, in Fenton and Kilkenny, you have arguably the greatest pairing to run a football team that there has been in the game. I mean, they are supreme architects, and obviously Cluxton as well. And maybe they'll prove once in a generation players. Maybe we'll look back at it in 5 years' time and say, yeah, well, they were really the engine, because I don't think there has been 2 players. Obviously, there's, you go way back in Purcell and Stockwell, and Mike Sheehy and John Egan. You some great pairings, but not 2 out at the centre of it, like Fenton and Kilkenny to run a team. I put Fenton. I mean, if you're picking a team of the century or a team of the millennium at this stage, well, those 2 guys are in with Stephen Cluxton and maybe James McCarthy. That's the footprint this Dublin team are leading. But if we're having this conversation again, Joe, in 5 years' time, and nothing has been done about it, well, the problem will be, double and maybe treble, because the light is going out in a lot of counties. That's the reality. You can say, well, what are they doing about it themselves? Quite a lot, actually. There's a lot of coaching. There's a lot of coaching initiatives going on throughout the country in certain areas, not everywhere. Not everywhere, it must be said, but there is a lot going on. But as teams catch up, they only find that Dublin are getting further away.
Yeah, there's a point made by Christy O'Connor. He's talking about Fenton for sure. Fenton ran the game, but he says Robbie McDade was Dublin's best player. I'm not sure about that necessarily. I thought Fenton as well, but Robbie McDade was brilliant. Either way, we're quibbling over an unimportant point. He says Robbie McDade had 38 possessions. He bagged 1-2 from 3 shots. What other county could replace Jack McCaffrey with a player of that quality? And that is the point. It feels like it's a conveyor belt, because it is. I mean, we were chatting outside, and me and Neil were just making the point, like, if you take Ireland, it's akin to a US state, a small US state. I mean, wouldn't you expect in a US state where the main city with the biggest population wins the state championship every year and progresses through to the nationals? Wouldn't we just take that as a fait accompli? So I don't see why it wouldn't extend to here, Matt. I mean, I know you're not a GAA expert and you're not pitching yourself as one, but you would have seen the coverage today in the papers.
Lord, I love my GAA and I do follow it. I'm certainly no expert. I was one line just from Joe Molloy just really jumped out at me. Brilliance. That's become boring. So they're saying how wonderful Dublin are, but their dominance is so bad. I was just thinking there when Colm was talking. I remember going to DCU back about 2008. My year might be out there, but their Sigerson Cup team was basically piloting a lot of the sports science that they were going to bring in to the Dublin county team. And their sports science and the way they were approaching the game was vastly in front than the other counties. I went out to Mayo a number of years before that, 7 or 8 years before that, and I saw how they were training. And there was little sports science, not none, but little sports science being involved. Now, where that sports science has gone in the last 10 years since then is mind-boggling. And it's exactly what Colm is saying. The other counties I know now are doing more.
Yeah.
But Dublin is still in front. It's how do they catch up? Like the Dublin players, all biped, kick both feet, all both hands. They can use the ball both hands. Every player equally as well. So that's got to start in the other counties at the very young age. That's where you learn that. So these guys now playing seniors for Dublin, they were part of that. They were under 10s, under 12s back in those days that were getting the new sports science, getting the new skills. And that's where the other counties have got to do. And again, the advantage that the agricultural counties had in the past, where they had more time, they're outdoors, they're playing, that natural advantage is gone now. And it has to be put in by very structured and very thoughtful coaching when you're getting into the kids at an early age and they come through. And it's a very, very big mountain for the other counties to climb when you consider how far Dublin had and the resources at their disposal. Compared to somewhere like Clare or Galway, like they're just not in the same league.
Yeah, I just continue. Just to re-emphasize that point. I mean, the demographics. It's the capital city. Obviously the counter argument is, well, Kerry dominated for those 12 years when they won 8 titles, and Kilkenny dominated under Brian Cody. But you have to factor in population here. It wasn't sustainable for Kerry to continue dominating, nor has it been sustainable for Kilkenny to keep dominating. And the fear is that, well, Dublin will. The fear, I say fear, it's certainly not fear for anyone in Dublin, because obviously they're enjoying this era. But this will continue. I mean, it is designed to continue. There is I can probably see at some stage Kerry getting up and dislodging them. Yeah. But I think the kickback then will be that Dublin will, bed down again and build a new team and go again. I don't believe it's cyclical. It's here to stay, and just the way intercounty is set up, and it's, as I said, structured for a different era. So it is going to take a lot of thought over the next decade, really, to untangle all this.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the GAA's best option at the moment is to try and bring other counties up to Dublin's level and to wait this out and hope there is something of a golden generation or two bunched together and that things stabilise a little bit and we get something a bit more equal. Because I don't know, Colm, like, even I'm almost at the point where I'd say, well, look, rather than splitting Dublin, I'll take Dublin winning 8 to 9 All-Ireland titles every decade rather than splitting them, because it's just such an unappealing prospect. Like, it could ruin, politically, this will be like, you know, civil war. Like, can you imagine how divisive and horrific the 2, 3, 4, 5 years around this process of potentially splitting Dublin, maybe 10, 20 years in the future, would be? I mean, it would just cause carnage.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't think Kerry would get any great satisfaction about beating Dublin North in the final, and I know neither Kildare would get no satisfaction about it. It wouldn't. But the other option is, unless, and there's, you know, can we really see Kerry? Or I honestly thought Kerry would bridge the gap this year. I thought there would be something of a lull in Dublin. I even remember doing a piece of Brian Fenton last year after the 2019 All-Ireland final. He says, you know, next year will be tough. He was really, you know, saying, where do we go from here? Well, they've kicked on, and he's led it, and Kieran Kilkenny has been with him, and you know, they've laid waste to everybody. Now, obviously, Kerry being beaten in Páirc Uí Chaoimh took out, you know, probably their strongest challengers. You know, Mayo I expect will win today, and Mayo, as they do, will, you know, put up a decent performance, and they're a very athletic team who are set for the right direction, but they won't beat them.
No. Here is the hope, though. There is to, you know, look, if we were doing a 38-game league out of the Premier League, then there would just be no chance that you could overpower Dublin's resources and the you know, 35 players they have. But this is more akin to the Champions League. There is a knockout quality to this, and so there is always, you know, distinct hope that a Jim McGuinness figure just has to get 18 to 19 players together, train like hell, and go at it for 2-3 years. And that only has to happen in different counties here and there, you know. So hopefully we're at a lowish point now, and we see more of that into the future, because there is always the knockout quality to these things.
But it's not just apparent at the moment. Even
no, it's not. It's bad at the moment.
Last year, if you take that second half of the All-Ireland, the first half of the replayed All-Ireland was a fantastic game, but in the second half, Dublin just wore them down with precision. They have such precision, and even last night I was watching the game, getting excited about a Cavan player dispossessing. I think it was Pádraig Faulkner took the ball from behind from Conor O'Callaghan, and that was the level of excitement you were getting out of it. Maybe a foothold, not scoring a goal or a mistake from Dublin. It was a Cavan player getting back to make a dispossession. Was about the height of it, really, because there was no sign of them scoring a goal. They weren't, you know, it was just a dispossession to prevent a goal was maybe a big thing in the game. That's what you were hanging on to. Maybe the All-Ireland final will be a little bit different. Obviously, if it is Mayo, I would expect it will be. But really, it's down to Kerry really to bridge this gap. And right now, and we might mention it in our next segment. But right now, it's not just looking likely at the moment. I thought this year there would be, and Jack McCaffrey going would have fueled that. Nobody in Croke Park. None of these things, potential barriers to Dublin's success, have. You know, Jim Gavin going. Well, I have to say, Desi Farrell has done a very fine job here.
Seamless.
He really has, and that's probably forgotten about in the wider argument. But he has. That's not an easy job to come in after a 5 in a row winning manager and keep things on track like that, and put your own stamp with a player like Robbie McDade that he had at underage.
Yeah. Well, look, they won't get every managerial appointment right for starters. You know, that's just impossible to do. So there is that, and it's worth stating, and I suspect you'd echo it before anybody from Dublin feels like this is an all-out attack. This is a brilliant team. I think everybody loves watching this team. The players are just a joy. Isn't it so good that the dominant team are an attacking team? Because we could very well have a team setting a defensive agenda. Dublin have done the opposite, and that's to their credit.
I don't think you could not appreciate.
Totally.
just how good Brian Fenton was last night. I mean, he's just magnificent and has been, and Kieran Kilkenny too, and the way he runs a game, like they really are.
Well, they're taking the game to new heights, and there is something to be said for that, isn't there?
They're players of all time, and they've come together. And maybe post Fenton and Kilkenny, there will be a change here. Not so much post Cluxton, and it seems strange to say that because he's probably, shortlisting one of the greatest players ever too, and he set the tone and all of that. But these guys are taking it to another level.
Okay, clock's coming against us. Things we had jotted down. There was a piece in the Sunday Times about the Waterford backroom team. There was a piece Mark O'Shea had written about, well, what happens when rumours go viral, as they tend to do increasingly on WhatsApp in this day and age. Luke Donald and his unlikely friendship with Michael Jordan. Luke Donald's been living out in Chicago for the last 20-odd years. And Mick Neville, it's FAI Cup final day in the Mail on Sunday, is reminiscing with Philip Quinn. Colm, if I had to push you to pick just one piece maybe that we might talk about for a couple of minutes.
I was looking at the Tipperary interviews. Obviously, we spent the last while talking about Dublin, but Tipperary are into an All-Ireland semi-final against Mayo today. There's an interview in the Sunday Times with Colin O'Riordan. There's an interview, it's in the Mail on Sunday, and most of the other Sunday papers, Sunday Independent as well, with Michael Quinlivan. And the fact of the matter is that if COVID hadn't hit, neither Colin O'Riordan or Michael Quinlivan would have been playing with Tipperary during the summer. And in all likelihood, they wouldn't have won the Munster title as they did on the weekend of Bloody Sunday. So they're just reflecting on that. Michael Quinlivan was going off travelling, and he was down in Australia. I think it was Australia. In the interview, he states, and he came home. He made a decision to come home with his girlfriend, and that made him available. Colin O'Riordan, obviously, he's in his off season now at AFL, so he's reflecting on a piece with Michael Foley there as well. Obviously, in the Sunday World, Pat Spillane has been reflecting on the Kerry situation and the rumours that went out about a player heave, which have been unfounded. Peter Keane will be remaining on, but Pat Spillane is saying in the Sunday World he's got this year to sort it out. I think it's an All-Ireland or bust with Peter Keane, and Pat is reflecting on that. Mark O'Shea is reflecting on social media, how it can spread rumours and all of that. And in his day, obviously, for most of his career, it wasn't such an issue. I enjoyed the Mick Neville piece with Philip Quinn because that's a name that resonates with 1980s League of Ireland soccer when, and he's gone through his journey. He's gone through his journey with that too. And obviously, we mentioned earlier, Luke Donald, the soft-spoken, gentle Englishman striking up a great friendship, their neighbours with Michael Jordan, that jumped out a bit at me as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's mad, really. So they live one house apart. There's one house in between their houses. Their wives have become great friends. They're at dinner all the time, and they play golf all the time. Picks his brain for advice. Obviously, Jordan's a golf nut, so I suspect that's the...
likes to play too, and Luke Donald likes to gamble a bit with him as well on the course. So he was such a good golfer, Jordan, too.
Yeah, well, he's probably good at everything, isn't he?
They play at Jordan's course that has only got 75 members that are all invited.
Yeah.
Not bad. Not bad.
I would say the gambling and cigar smoking that goes on at that club, I would say, is a thing to behold.
With the odd whiskey in there as well.
Listen, life is good, I'm sure. Donald says, he never treated him like a superstar. And he picked Jordan's brain on various things. An example, asked David Walsh, I was trying desperately to get to world number one. I was feeling overwhelmed. He told me about a year when he felt for the Bulls to win the NBA championship, he'd have to average 32 points a game, which was pretty difficult. He said to me, I never thought 32 points a game. I thought 8 points a quarter. That's achievable. So, Luke, you've got to break down the challenge into achievable goals. And it worked, says Donald. On Mark O'Shea's point, Matt, geez, O'Shea makes the point, these days I find myself frequently bothered about the direction our game is taking, and I think about it, and when I think about it, it's a relief I'm not playing anymore, and sometimes you're glad just to be out of it. He says no more so than with this stuff, like WhatsApp rumours, social media rumours, There was one that went around last weekend about the Kilkenny hurlers, which described a scene in the dressing room that appeared to have been lifted straight out of Gangs of London. During the week, meanwhile, a little birdie informed me that Jack McCaffrey was back in the Dublin panel. The same source was also tweeting about the vote that never happened in Kerry the previous week. It is not just that there are malevolent forces out there making up these lies, but there is a whole host of gullible ones happy to spread them. Sure, there's no smoke without fire, we'll be told. And there is a thing called smoke damage too. It's up to us not to listen, and demands that the pervasiveness of social media be regulated and so on. We've made all these points 100 times. They're not going to change. I mean, I don't know. Would a month go by without a WhatsApp rumour arriving on your phone, Matt, about a certain team, or forwarded on about a gazillion times?
Mate, I've got to the point, Joe. I really am trying to keep right away from it. I mean, with the anti-vaccine, Trump saying that he won the election, and how when you've got leadership around the world that just lies about such important stuff as the American election, that other people just don't pick it up and run with it. 5G gives your grandchildren 3 heads. It starts at that level, then it comes down into our sport. The hard part for the sportsman is to keep away from it. I mean, like in the old days, it was newspapers, so you could not buy a newspaper or turn the radio. But the generation that is performing it, it must be so difficult, because there used to be a saying that Sachin Tendulkar, the great Indian cricketer, one of the greatest players of all time, said, I don't let people into my head, so don't invite them into your mind. So in other words, you shut out the talk from other people, media, and so on. But with the social media, with the current generation where it is, it must be so difficult. And, I agree with you. If you're winning, it's fine. But when you have what's happened to Kerry, or what's happening to Irish rugby or Australian rugby, the malviolence and the falsifiers are very, very quick to get online, be keyboard warriors hiding behind their anonymity on the phone.
Yeah, it was kind of quaint back in the day from a GAA point of view, Colm, when you'd hear players checking the forums. I mean, it's
and they remain that remain hidden. Some of these WhatsApp rumors they're being started just deliberately by people who want to see how far do they carry and how far do they spread, and like wildfires, they really take off. And there are people out there who will, and we spend a lot of time checking them out. In some instances, obviously that Kerry one needed to be really examined closely. I do believe, not that there's a player heave against Peter Keane, but there was some dissatisfaction with the season this year. However, when you get to Kilkenny and you see the detail of that, I mean, you really have to wonder. Somebody's obviously just creating these, sending them and throwing them out there to see how far do they carry.
Yeah. Oh, very. Like the whole country. There is. Remember,
even around lockdown, even around going into levels, there was that famous one of somebody who knew someone in the defence forces, and it sounds plausible and convincing until you get to the bottom of it. And it's not just in Gaelic games; it's in sport. It's across life, really.
Yeah, I think I might have been in India. I'm not 1,000% sure, but anyway. The forwarding of WhatsApp messages was resulting in violence against a certain ethnic group. And it just became so serious that there was a limit on how often a message could be forwarded, introduced by WhatsApp. All these measures are available. And look, rumours about discontent in a GAA team don't compare, but it just captures the nature of how in all aspects of life, all this stuff whizzing around is at a pace that I'm not sure society can handle. Anyway, that's probably above our pay grade for a Sunday morning. Fellas, we're just out of time. Matt Williams, great to have you on. Thanks for doing that, Matt. Appreciate it.
Pleasure, mate. Enjoyed it.
And Colm Keys of the Irish Independent. I suspect heading to Croke Park. Colm, are you?
Just getting ready now, Joe, when I switch off here.
Okay, very good. Listen, appreciate it.
Looking forward to that. I mean, it was a fair contest in 2016. It probably won't follow the path of last night, but I think Mayo will get there. So thanks very much, Joe, for having me on, and thanks, Matt.
Pleasure, Colm. Good to talk to you, mate. Thanks, Joe.
Okay.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.